Hello and welcome back to another episode of the 1973 Datsun 240Z restoration. In this episode, I'm hoping to go ahead and start getting into the motor of this car. Like I think I've mentioned in a previous episode, there is a little bit of coolant that I discovered sitting on the back of the intake valve for number 6. So what I would like to go ahead and get done in this episode is start looking at the engine, get the cylinder head off, see if I can find any obvious signs of damage that is causing the issue that I discovered, and possibly also some of the drivability issues this car did have leading up to whenever I actually parked it in here to start the restoration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, kind of get cleaned up around here a little bit, swing the motor out so a little bit better access to it, and start prepping to get it pulled off. I'm probably gonna have to make a run to the hardware store to get a couple different sockets for different bolts that are going on in the motor, but we are gonna be starting there. All right, so where we're gonna start is just going ahead, kind of getting the stuff out of the way of the valve cover. So that means just unplugging these spark plugs, undoing the fuel feed lines right here, the fuel feed lines to the carburetors, and then just going ahead and getting the valve cover popped off, and from there we'll get our first initial look at the inside of the motor, how much oil buildup, gunk there is, and then from there we will, basically from there we're going to start going through and seeing what's inside. All right, so the valve cover bolts are loose, so I'm going to bag those up and use a rubber mallet to tap the valve cover off of its seat. All right, you're going to see this with me in real time. What lies beneath the valve cover. Get that free. Not terribly dirty. Looks like it's probably been cleaned out at one point. And looks a little oily, surprise, surprise, but let me show you guys what I see. So in here, inside the valve cover, fairly clean. As you can see, it looks like somebody may have cleaned up, wiped up in here at some point. But if I go over to the engine, as you can see, the oil is fairly, it's kind of collected right here in the cam cap bolts. It's not super clean, plainly. It's pretty dark. I don't love the condition of the oil. It pretty well sooted itself up fairly quickly. I think I changed this oil probably no more than 300, 500 miles ago, somewhere in that range. And it's already pretty blacked up. Some of that could be just from the oil that was in there previously, not all that came out, so it kind of mixed together and darkened this stuff up. But looking at the cam, there is some stuff that I'm not experienced enough to know how bad it necessarily is, or if I should even really be worried about it. It's most obvious on the, that actually looks like it's on a couple of these cylinders. Right here, this is the front exhaust lobe right here. I can see you got a little bit of hot spotting right there on the top of the cam where the metal kind of changes colors. And it looks like that, I got it on this one right here. It's fairly obvious right there. And it's kind of, hoping my phone can pick this all up. It's there on a lot of the valves. Now, some of them, however, look much darker. Now, obviously, this is the back side of the valve, so it does clean up over here. So depending on how tightly set the valve lash was, that's going to dictate where it goes from kind of that gray color to that more polished look. But you can see there's still some of that hot spotting right there. What else am I looking at here that I can kind of show you? On the cam lobes themselves, it kind of just catches my finger, but I don't know if that's just old oil that's kind of collected and sat there over time, and that's what I'm feeling, or if there's some actual wear in the cam itself. It's really faint, really subtle. I mean, it doesn't look like anything was grinding away on any of the lobes, so this really might be pretty superficial wear potentially, and this cam might still be good to go. But that's ultimately something I'm probably going to have to do some more research into to better understand and go from there. But nonetheless, outside of this at the moment, What I'm going to do next is double check what size the cam sprocket bolt is. So you've got the mechanical fuel pump, the cam right there for that arm, and the bolt right there, because I'm going to either be using, well, I'm going to have to remove this bolt. So figure what size this bolt is, probably go and get a big 6-point socket for that to use a breaker bar, try to break this free. I'm still need to get it over to top dead center, obviously, so that way I can mark my location here for where it needs to be when I crack this loose. In the circumstance that I do put this head back on, otherwise, if it's not going to stay on, or if it's going to be a different cylinder head, it's not really going to matter so much. But nonetheless, I will at least get the motor to top dead center, so that way it's set and I can kind of take the next step in removing the cylinder head. One other thing I noticed immediately after shutting off the camera is this bolt for the oil spray bar for the camshaft is missing. So I don't know where that bolt went, if somebody actively left that out of there previously, or if it's in the bottom of the pan, or if it's, found its way down there at some point and is no longer down there. So that's something I'm going to discover. And yeah, we will go from there. All right, so I popped the cam sprocket off. I jammed a little piece of wood in there to hopefully keep the timing chain in place. I think I did actually hear the tensioner click one more spot out, so likely this is all going to have to come off anyway, but nonetheless, it's in there, keeping the chain from falling all the way down. I've already pulled the 2 very important bolts at the front that people apparently tend to forget. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is just go in and undo all of the head bolts. There's an order to do them in. I don't have the ability to put the picture up on the screen as far as I know, but it's out there online, so you can find it. It's pretty well documented. Follow the order of undoing it, or you'll risk, causing damage to your engine, which you never really want to do. All right, so I have the head bolts off of the block, so it's time to discover whatever's underneath it. All right, so the pistons and the block are not what I was really hoping or expecting to see. Looking at the pistons, none of them appear washed down like they had any coolant running into them. So as it turns out, I don't think I really had a head gasket that was causing the coolant on the back of a valve or my drivability issues, but these are super, super oily, all except for number 5. Number 5 is reasonably dry by comparison, but everything else is very wet with oil. So a couple things could be happening here. One is that my piston rings could be pretty wore out. Number 3 does have a pretty defined scratch that I can catch with my fingernail. The rest of them, none of them are catching, so I don't think it's in horrific condition, but the piston rings could be in bad shape. Another thought I had is that possibly the valve stem seals could be pretty wore out, and they're letting oil come in and get all over the cylinders, the combustion chamber, which could possibly explain why cylinder 5 is still fairly dry, but at the same time, it's not perfectly clean by any stretch, but it's just not soaking wet with oil. So maybe that cylinder was just running better enough to burn off more of the oil and not let it collect. I really don't know, but nonetheless, with the scratch on cylinder 3, and honestly, until I pull the front cover off and take the timing chain off, I'm not really going to roll over without potentially binding up the timing chain. So I can't look at 1 and 6 because potentially those could be scored all hell and be no good to use. So nonetheless, I'm going to show you what the inside of the combustion chambers look like, just so you can kind of get an idea for, the condition of this motor, and who knows, I might go ahead and do some more teardown of it at a later date, just whenever I get curious. But at this point, it's looking like I may need to source another engine. So I already have the cylinder head actually put away where I'm going to be storing it. And as you can see by the cylinders, it's not looking terribly consistent across the board. A couple of the cylinders, combustion chambers, are significantly oilier than the others, such as number 6 is just painted with oil. There's a lot of buildup on the valves themselves, inconsistent buildup across the valves. Some of them are cleaner, some of them are not. Looking at the which you can see from the valves that are open. Plenty of oil in the intake runner, which again kind of points possibly towards more valve seals. But looking at the intake ports for the carburetors, it's nowhere near as oily. So maybe it's oil getting pushed back through somehow if the valve lash isn't tight enough, or sorry, if the valve lash is too tight on some of these cylinders. That's a possibility, but really, I think there's a good chance this motor and this cylinder are going to be sitting for a little while until I get a wild hair at my butt and decide to go ahead and start rebuilding them. Partially is good practice for myself because I've never rebuilt an engine before, and honestly, I'm kind of out of excuses for this one, but at the same time, I want to drive the car, so like I think I just said, you know, considering looking and sourcing a new engine for the car that's hopefully in a little better shape. So I think what I'm actually going to do to kind of help, you know, keep this video something where there's a little bit of progress really getting done. What I'm going to start on next is actually coming up front to the engine bay, and I'm going to go about installing the brace that I purchased for this vehicle for two purposes. One, I need to drill the holes so that way I'll have a way of mounting the brace up whenever I go to put everything back together. But also mainly because I want to try to keep this all as tied together, as structural, and as straight as I possibly can throughout the process of me cutting out the rust, you know, in the fender wells, frame rails, all that stuff. And it's a triangulated brace. I'm going to show that to you now. Okay, so here is the triangulated strut tower brace that I purchased for the Z. It came from Apex Engineered. I've purchased a few things from them for this mild restoration slash resto mod, whatever you want to call this project I've got going for the Z. But I purchased this one for one big reason. Well, actually two reasons. One, I didn't want something where it was going to be hard mounted between, these are the two that are going to go between the strut towers, and that's back at the firewall. I didn't want one where if I wanted to remove the strut tower, I'd have to also remove it from the firewall, simply because if I wanted to do valve lash or anything like that where I need to pull the valve cover off, having to undo the firewall mounting as well would just be a few extra steps I really didn't want to do. So these bolt in at the firewall and also back here. So what I'm hoping I can do, because I haven't confirmed this, but fairly certain I'll be able to, if I want to do valve lash with this installed, I can just undo the ones that bolt into the shock towers and leave those ones in place. So that way it'll all, you know, be a few less steps for me to be able to do that. As well, what I also wanted is I didn't want one with any hinge points in it. You'll see a lot of strut tower braces where they'll have a hinge right here, which makes it easy to do valve lash and stuff because you can just undo one side and fold it up. But what that really means is these points are not going to be fixed in place if you do that. So if you hit a bump, you know, it'll allow the bar will flex, and it'll also allow the hinges to flex. So it's not really going to help keep it as rigid as this will. So that was one of the big reasons that I wanted one where there were no hinge points in it. So that way it helped keep the car stiff, sturdy, and ideally make it ride just that little bit better, be a little bit more responsive. So that's why I went with this. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and move this into the garage and get started on eyeing this up on how it's going to get installed. All right, so I'm in the garage and I've got this loosely bolted up, and I've got a slight issue that I was really kind of hoping I wasn't going to have. So I've spent a good bit of time adjusting this, getting it as centered as I possibly can, adjusting it with the bolts loose, you know, so I can kind of see where they're going to land on the firewall because I have to drill holes in order to install this. As you can see, it's centered pretty well on the money as far as the strut tops, but the issue that I've got, I have the backing plate up here. It might be a little bit hard to see. This side, if I can slide it over, I can pretty well get it right in line with where it's supposed to be. Cross-referencing it with some pictures on the website, it's sticking there just slightly, so I can hold it like this. It's supposed to be seemingly right in line, kind of where the fold is for the hood latch, where the bolt holes go. But if I go over here to this side, you know, I can get it kind of on the same plane right there. But looking at where I've got the backing plate centered, on this side, it's almost perfect, but this side, we've got like a good 1/2 inch, 3/4 that it's not gonna bolt up to. And I've checked already. I'm gonna do some more double checking, but I've taken angles from the center of this to this little hole right here, which is on the center line of the vehicle, That matches in both directions. I measured from the lip of the firewall here to the center of that, and it's the same on both sides. So I'm fairly confident that my car is square. This isn't an issue of the car possibly having like the strut tower being pushed in slightly that way, or else those measurements would have been different than on this side. So what I'm guessing probably happened is, you know, they have these things that are jig and they weld them up so they're all the same length, all the same size, everything like that. Possibly whenever they were welding up this one, there might have been like a slight bit of heat deformation. Maybe it came off the jig too quickly. I don't know. Possibly that the nut that's welded onto the end here that this threads in with, possibly that's off at just slightly an angle. And, you know, a slight change here has a big difference up there. Now, unfortunately, there's really no way that I can use that backing plate with this in its current arrangement, simply because, you know, no matter what I do short of pushing the firewall back that way, that I'm going to be able to keep this or get these two in line and the same width apart. And then even at that point, if I push that side in, then it's not going to be flush against the back, which is what you would want. So what I think I'm going to do, because ultimately this is something I'm going to have on the car post restoration, but for now, all it's supposed to be doing is keeping the strut towers in place. What I think I'm going to do is make my own little backing plate with the correct width, so that way I can, you know, continue to make progress on the car, because, you know, they've been very good to me, this company. Whenever I purchased their frame rails as well as some fender braces, which are going to triangulate, this piece is going to have to come out, but it's going to triangulate from down here up to about here or so on the, you know, the fender support, or the, you know, whatever you want to call this section of metal. It's going to brace that. I purchased those, and I purchased some frame rails that are going to extend further back than the originals to help tie the car together. I purchased those. The frame rails they sent me were actually for 280Z. I already talked to them. They said they're going to send me the correct ones. So, you know, I may reach out, see if I can get a, you know, a measurement as far as how far apart these should sit whenever they're, you know, installed, so that way I can know if it is potentially an issue where my car is not square. I don't believe that is the issue that's going on, though. I think it's just that one possibly doesn't fit exactly right. And I purchased these actually about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I just never got around to installing them until now. So, I mean, it's not like I didn't have time to discover that there was an issue. So, I mean, I really, you know, I'm not going to hold it against them that I just discovered this now. But like I said, I will probably still reach out and see if I can at least get, you know, whatever the correct measurement is, because maybe it is just as simple as that backing plate might be cut too long, because that's also a possibility. And that could be what's causing the issue, that I can't align the bolts and put bolts through once I drill the holes. But nonetheless, I'm going to quit rambling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to kind of lock these down slightly and get the bars where they're going to stay in place. So that way I can drill the holes, and from there I will take measurements from the backside, make myself a little backing plate, bolt that in, and that'll be it for now on the bar to help keep the car structurally more sound. All right, so I made up my kind of crude but effective backing plate that I'm going to use. It is the same thickness as the one that I received from Apex Engineered. I'm going to end up cleaning this up and making this nicer once I get closer to actually finishing up the restoration of the car. Paint this up, you know, so that way it doesn't rust or anything. It probably take a little bit of weight out of the center just like they do. But for now, what I'm going to do is get it back here in place, get the struts bolted up. I'm just going to do this, you know, with a nut and a wrench on both sides, simply because once I finish this up, I'm probably going to, sorry, I got my hands full. I'm probably going to weld these in place into the position they're going to be in as installed. So that way, if I ever want to take off, you know, that section of the bar, undo this, if I want to check or do my valve lash on the motor, all I have to do is just have a wrench on the inside of the bay. I don't have to get one underneath the cowl, and I can go ahead and loosen these up, take those off, and go from there. So it should work out nicely. You know, it's a shame that I couldn't use the one that was supplied with the kit, but nonetheless, you know, you make do, and you move on. So yeah, what I'm gonna do now is go ahead and get this bolted in. All right, so the brace is all in and snugged up. I might tighten the bolts up just a little bit more on the actual strut towers themselves, just to make sure that they don't want to back out or anything like that. But as you can see, it's a fully triangulated brace. It fits pretty well. Like I said, it's kind of a shame that I had to make my own backing plate for it. But what this ultimately is going to do for me is, besides being a performance upgrade, it will help to hold and keep my strut towers in place, because I do have a good bit of rust on both sides. As you can see over here, where it's starting to break through both sides of the strut tower, and it's doing the same down here. So there's a good chance that I'm going to take out, let me put these, everything's going to fall down here, sorry. But there's a good chance that I'm going to take out probably up to about there at the very minimum of this, possibly a little bit higher. Ideally, if I don't have to get into where it's kind of got this like compound curve, I would like to avoid that, because it's just gonna be harder for me to replicate here in the garage, just without having, a stamp to produce strut towers, or really any metalworking tools beyond just a hammer and something to hammer against. But that is gonna do, actually, the strut tower brace itself is gonna do a whole lot for me as far as keeping this all structurally sound and sturdy, and keep the stuff from moving around. Because as I mentioned, while these frame rails may be good, I'm really hoping I can save them. I know the metal behind them on both sides is really bad, and it's gonna have to come out. So this at one point will be a kind of a free movement. It's not gonna be held in place by anything. So the strut towers being up there to keep, or the strut bar to keep the strut towers in place, will help to keep all of this, from sagging or lifting or anything like that. And then I'll be building some, the jig out beneath it, which will help to locate the height of that, and a few other things to, take measurements to make sure it all goes together the way that it should. So I do think that's where I'm going to round out this video. We did kind of unfortunately discover that it looks like my engine, while it did run and drive its way in here, there were underlying issues with it that, were not what I was expecting. But nonetheless, that motor is probably going to be set aside for me to either learn to do a rebuild on, or do something with it. I'm not planning to get rid of the motor, just because it is the original one to this car. And while this isn't obviously based on the strut bar, this is not going to be a numbers matching, perfect, true restoration. Not trying to make it look as it was brand new, but I do want it. It is kind of cool to keep the original motor to the car with the car. Even if temporarily it's not going to be in the car, so I can get it done up nicely, done up right. So the motor will be sticking around, but I am actually going to be going and looking at another motor and trans package actually here this week as of recording. So it might be a little bit before you either hear or see about what the outcome is of that, if I go ahead and purchase those, or if I'm still going to be hunting for another motor for this. I don't think I'm going to be doing any swapping of the motor in this car quite yet. If ever, I don't know. Everything's up in the air. It's a crazy world. Plans always change. But nonetheless, for now, we're going to be sticking with an L series in this car. But we did get the strut tower installed, which is good. That's going to help me, like I said, keep everything structurally sound and stable. I'm going to be able to now finish getting the car kind of raised up high enough to the level that I want to build the jig to, and give me some space to work underneath the car and start addressing some of the rust. So that's where I'm going to round out this video. I appreciate you all watching. If you have comments, if you have questions, if you have any useful information, please absolutely feel free to leave those down below. I am very curious to see kind of what y'all think of this stuff. And if you like this stuff, give it a like. That way, hopefully other people can see it and can chime in and kind of see what's going on with this build, and hopefully help others to do the same thing with theirs, because these cars are really cool, and I would like to see them more often on the road, because unfortunately they don't show up very often unless you live in like Southern California ultimately. But yeah, so I'm going to round out the video here. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys and girls all in the next one.